Hi, welcome to our webinar on ABI Justice. I'm Melissa Vigar. I'm the Executive Director at the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, and joining me today is Katie Manikas. She is the Director of AccesSolve, and together and along with Mary Pera, our Communications Manager at BIST, we created an ABI Justice Toolkit to provide some education around brain injury and the justice system. This toolkit was funded by the Law Foundation of Ontario. As you've probably are on the website, you found the toolkit. So we just wanted to give an opportunity to give a bit of background about the program and the history as to why we created this toolkit. So just to begin with, what do we know? We know that traumatic brain injury is highly prevalent among jail and prison inmates and those who are justice involved. We do know that brain injury in the criminal justice system is an important public health issue. We do know that some people who have had a brain injury might not make the connection between their injury and some of the challenges they are experiencing. We know that brain injury can be invisible. It might not be identified through screening in any justice system or in any justice system documents, which is really important because somebody with a significant brain injury might be going through the justice system without any of the accommodations that they might require to help them with the challenges that they're experiencing. We know that a brain injury can affect all aspects of a person's involvement with the justice system and community integration. And we know that this can pose unique challenges for lawyers, caregivers, and brain injury survivors. So the aim of this training and this toolkit is to help. So just to give an overview of really some hard-hitting facts, and certainly in the work that Katie and I have been doing, the combined, we've been in the field of brain injury for many years, and we've seen a lot of our members and the people we support end up in really unfortunate situations and being involved with the justice system. And these facts really just confirm the things that we've seen in our own practice and in our own work. So we know that as many as 80% of incarcerated adults have a reported history of traumatic brain injury. Approximately 50% of youth who have been charged with an offense have a documented history of traumatic brain injury. And we'll talk a little later about what a traumatic brain injury actually is. So if you're not familiar with the terms, sit tight, it's coming. Adverse early life experiences are common for persons with a history of brain injury and incarceration, particularly for criminalized women. In Ontario, which is where Katie and I are, men and women who sustained a brain injury were 2.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than men and women who had not sustained a brain injury. And really what that shows us is that difficulty navigating the police system and navigating the justice system really puts folks with brain injuries at a significant disadvantage. Recent findings indicate that people with a brain injury are more likely to incur a serious charge and less likely to achieve discretionary release. So a bit just about global impact of brain injury. So we know brain injury is the #1 cause of death and disability in Canadians under the age of 40. We know that over 500,000 Canadians sustain a brain injury each year and that these incidence rates are rising. While research states that men experience a brain injury twice as often as women, we know now that when we look at factors such as intimate partner violence, there's a lot of undiagnosed brain injuries amongst the female population. So research is emerging in this area, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. We know that the leading cause of brain injury are falls, motor vehicle crashes, bicycle crashes, and sports-related injuries.
So when we think about the symptoms that impact an individual after acquired brain injury, it's important to note that these symptoms are often invisible. So the assumptions that we make about an individual with a brain injury are really important to consider. These symptoms can occur across the continuum. They can be complicated and complex and affect an individual in a myriad of ways. So it's really important that we consider this in the context of a criminal justice situation. The individual who's going through a criminal justice process might be experiencing symptoms that affect their awareness, their ability to plan, their impulse control, their communication, their ability to pay attention for long stretches of time. And again, because these symptoms are invisible, the individual might not even understand or be aware of how their brain injury impacts them as an individual. So it's just really important that we keep in mind, again, that brain injury is an invisible disability and can affect a person in many different ways. The symptoms of brain injury can also interplay with each other. So, and issues that can accompany a brain injury, how do they present and how do we address them? If somebody has a brain injury and they suffer from a sleep disorder, this can contribute to fatigue. It means that there might be certain parts of day that don't work well for them. Morning meetings might not work well for them. Afternoon meetings may not work well for them. They may become tired at that point in the day. And again, if they haven't slept, then their pain level could increase. This could in turn impact their ability to process information and to communicate effectively. If somebody is in an interaction with a police officer and they have difficulty with communication, their words are slurred, a police officer may interpret that as them being intoxicated in some way, or in a court process, if they're having difficulty with their communication, it could also be interpreted as some type of intoxication. So again, it's really important to not make assumptions about an individual and to understand that the symptoms that they're facing, they might not be aware of the symptoms, and it could be impacting them every step of the process. Overstimulation, light, and sound. This is, if an individual with a brain injury is attending a court appearance, the courtroom is busy, it's loud, there's lots of people coming in and out of the courtroom. So this could make somebody really anxious if they have light and sound sensitivities. Attention, memory, and focus. These are really really important part of our executive functioning. If you have short-term memory impairment, you are not going to be able to retain information that's provided to you, and you are not going to have the attention span to sit through a really long process. So if information is provided to you, you may forget it. Like your appointment time, you may not know what time to show up to court because you've forgotten. And this isn't that people are being non-compliant. This is that they have a disability that prevents them from following through. And again, vision and hearing changes are lost. Depression, anxiety are concurrent disorders that often affect people with brain injury. Substance use and mental health challenges also often go hand in hand with a brain injury. And if an individual is not diagnosed as having a brain injury, they might not understand how their symptoms impact them. And this can be incredibly challenging to live with on a day-to-day basis and cause a lot of anxiety and stress in a person's life. And these impairments can impact a person's ability to seek employment, which causes financial stress. And then brain injury can also result in physical challenges and impairments. So if you look at an individual who's experiencing many different symptoms and how they're connected to one another, it's important to think about this in a criminal justice context and how this can make that challenge more apparent throughout accessing the process. So there are many factors to consider for clients who have a brain injury during the legal process. When we look at the symptoms that are associated with TBI, the cognitive and communication challenges, emotional regulation, and behavioral challenges, this can complicate the process that they're involved in. This can also complicate the access to the process. So individuals might not be able to advocate for their own needs. They may not be able to identify their own needs, which means that they won't have access to a fair process or an accessible process. Emotional challenges could include reduced affect and initiation, aggression, depression, and anxiety. Cognitive challenges could include alterations, again, in attention, memory, multitasking, self-monitoring, planning, and organizing. So it's really important that if an individual is experiencing any of these challenges related to their symptoms, that they have support to access the process and that they have support to navigate the process. Cognitive communication refers to the difficulties with any aspect of communication. So this is listening and understanding, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking. An individual may be able to pay attention to what's being said to them, but they might not be able to retain that information. So having support to ensure that they are understanding what is being communicated to them and making adjustments in the way that you communicate. Some individuals may struggle with literacy, so writing down complicated directions is not going to work for them. So it's just being really attuned to what your client's needs and understanding that the challenges that they may be facing related to their brain injury.
So one of the things that we like to highlight when we talk about brain injury, that it's a process. It's not a one-time single event that happens to somebody. The brain injury can have chronic and evolving neurological consequences. And as such, it should really be viewed and managed as a chronic issue as opposed to just a one-time event. So we need to look at this from a policy perspective, from a healthcare perspective, and from an insurance perspective. We do know that new symptoms could appear months after an injury because there's a cascade type effect from neuron deterioration and death. So what your symptoms are like at the time of the injury might not be what your symptoms are like months following your injury. And one of the things we also know is after one brain injury, you're at greater risk for a second brain injury, so 3 times more, and 8 times greater for other bodily injuries. And part of the reason for that is, as Katie mentioned, when someone has a brain injury, it impacts their insight, it impacts their judgment, it can impact their balance and fatigue issues, and all of these things can put someone at risk for a secondary injury. So if people aren't given the proper supports following a brain injury, they certainly are at a greater risk for secondary injuries, which is unfortunate. And we always like to just talk a little bit about social determinants of health and traumatic brain injury. So what we know is that brain injury can happen to anybody. It can happen to anybody, anytime, any age, any place, any socioeconomic background, any cultural background. Brain injury is a global issue that affects many people. However, when somebody has a brain injury, your place in society can really determine some of your recovery. So what we know is that if prior to your brain injury, there's issues with economic stability, issues with your health, if there's underlying health conditions, if there's underlying cognitive challenges, literacy issues, the brain injury is going to be superimposed onto that, making the outcomes a lot less positive. So it's really important that when we look at the social determinants of health, that we look at a person's place in society. Oh, no, I don't like what I'm saying here. Sorry. Still. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about brain injuries is when we know that brain injury can happen to anyone at any place at any time. So brain injury can impact someone regardless of their age, their socioeconomic status, their cultural background. It really is a global issue that can affect any person at any time. However, while brain injury does occur across all levels of socio-demographic status, evidence suggests a strong socioeconomic gradient, with individuals from a disadvantaged background being at greater risk. So certainly your social background can increase your risk of having a brain injury depending on your economic stability, where you live, etc. We also know that the challenges that come with a brain injury can be superimposed on pre-existing language and literacy impairments, as well as mental health, substance use, and addictions challenges. So if somebody is struggling with these issues prior to a brain injury, their recovery might be worse and more challenging following a brain injury.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an acquired brain injury versus what is a traumatic brain injury. In brain injury services, you'll often hear these two terms. So we just wanted to touch base on what the different terms mean. So an acquired brain injury is a brain injury that takes place after birth. So a brain injury that occurs during fetal development isn't considered an acquired brain injury. And a traumatic brain injury is defined as an alteration in brain function or some other type of brain pathology which is caused by an external force. So examples of a traumatic brain injury would be a fall, motor vehicle accidents, assault, anything where your head is struck by or against an object. An industrial accident would be an example of a traumatic brain injury. Also, other examples of traumatic brain injury would be some type of a concussive injury. So the brain isn't actually hit or struck against something, but this is something that you'll see in explosion injury. So the brain isn't actually hit with an object, but the force of the impact causes the brain to shift inside the skull. And that is also an example of a traumatic brain injury. A non-traumatic brain injury is typically a medical event. So anoxia, which is loss of oxygen to the brain, a brain tumor, encephalitis, some type of toxic event, a vascular insult, or other types of brain disorders and infections. Developmental injuries, um, including fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So again, acquired brain injury, these are just a few scans to highlight what that would look like on an MRI or a CT scan. And once again, FASD is an example of a developmental brain injury. So this occurs during the fetal development and not after birth. So when we talk about how individuals who have suffered a brain injury are vulnerable, we also like to talk about how brain injury can contribute to poverty for an individual. If you are an individual who has had a severe brain injury and you don't have the um, access to an intensive rehab process because you don't have private insurance, if you are in a motor vehicle accident, you might have access to insurance benefits that would include really intensive rehab support. But if you don't have access to this process, then your brain injury outcome and your life situation might be different. So we'd like to ensure that we are covering all the bases about why people with a brain injury might be more vulnerable. So if you have had a brain injury, this could prevent you from and exclude you from education and employment opportunities. This might limit your social opportunities due to the symptoms that you face. This could limit your access to safe and affordable shelter options, um, limit your access to, again, like we talked about, medical intervention, assessment, and rehabilitation. You are maybe excluded from political processes and advocating for your own rights. And there could be a lack of support for the high costs associated with the impairment. So this leads to fewer skills, low self-esteem, a reduced ability to independently assert your own rights. And this could end up with having dependence on traditional social assistance programs, including Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Income Support Program. And unfortunately, if you are on ODSP or OW, you are living at 67% of the poverty rate in Ontario. So this is not sufficient to meet your housing needs, your health needs, your social needs. So it's really important that we talk about how brain injury can make individuals vulnerable to poverty. So another area that individuals with brain injury are overrepresented is within the homeless population. And I think that this is really important to highlight because in current homelessness prevention strategies and poverty reduction strategies, brain injury is often not a part of the conversation. So a study done in 2009 from St. Mike's Hospital found that 58% of the homeless men and 42% of homeless women in Toronto have a brain injury. And the average age of the first brain injury was 17 years old. 87% of those injuries occurred before they became homeless. So this population is at further risk of experiencing seizures, mental health problems, and poor physical health. If you are living with a brain injury and homeless, this harms a person's well-being, and as such, this population is 5 times more likely to have visited an emergency room in the past year, twice as likely to have been arrested in the previous year, and 3 times as likely to have been the victim of a physical assault in the past year. So again, brain injury increases a person's vulnerability to becoming homeless, and then once they are homeless, it's a really difficult cycle to break. They could potentially experience more serious brain injuries living homeless and on the street. And this population is underserved and overrepresented when it comes to the homeless population. The study that was done in Toronto at St. Mike's Hospital has been done in other countries around the world, and similar results have all been found, where at least 50% of the homeless population has identified having a brain injury. This is really important to highlight when it comes to brain injury screening processes for vulnerable populations. Asking a person if they have had a brain injury, they might not be able to identify what that means or what that is. But if you ask a person, have you ever been hit in the head? Did you lose consciousness? And what changed for you after the fact? You will get probably a different answer. it's just screening is incredibly important when it comes to supporting vulnerable populations, and then understanding, again, how those symptoms of brain injury can impact their ability to participate in whatever process it is, whether it's a housing process, a criminal justice process, um, or an income process. So it's really important to consider how brain injury can create vulnerabilities for this population.
Now we're just going to talk a little bit about intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury. And going back to what Katie talked about, as well as this, the Brain Injury Society of Toronto and some other organizations across the province has done some work in this area as well. So if you have, if you want to see some of the projects that we've been involved in, you can visit the BIST website, www.bist.ca, and find reports on poverty reduction, intimate partner violence, and homelessness. And across all three, what you'll see is that every single person we supported through these programs had some type of cognitive challenge that acted as a barrier for them being able to navigate these systems. So like Katie said, it's really important that in all populations we're screening, and we'll talk about screening tools in a bit when we talk about the website, but that we're screening for brain injury, because a lot of times the person who sustained the brain injury might not even recognize that they have one. And as such, in the populations of intimate partner violence, we know this and we see it. So there's an increased awareness about TBI among women survivors of intimate partner violence, and this is due to repeated hits to the head, face, neck, and unfortunately strangulation. So when someone is strangled, there is a oxygen is cut off, the oxygen flow is cut off, that can result in a brain injury. We know this not only affects women who are involved in relationships, but women who are in the sex trade, many of who are Indigenous. We know that a recent study of women in the sex trade, 95%, which is staggering, had sustained head injuries, either by being hit in the head with objects or having their head slammed into objects. 61% of women involved in prostitution has sustained brain injuries. So this is a really underserved population. And there are a lot of organizations right now really working hard to raise awareness about this epidemic, and it's across the globe once again. And there's a fantastic resource. We did not create it, but we are big fans of it. AbiToolkit.ca is an amazing resource and website that focuses specifically on intimate partner violence and brain injury. The intersection between those two, how to screen and how to assist somebody who may have sustained a brain injury due to IPV. So very much encourage people to check that out. Again, not our resource. We take no credit other than we are big fans and really want to share that resource with people. All right, and now on to the meat of our presentation. So this is the AbiJustice.org website. Now you may have stumbled across this webinar on the BIST page or on the ABI Justice page. So I'm not sure where you're coming from, but if you haven't landed to this website yet, this is really where we put all the tools and resources that we found that address brain injury and the criminal justice system. So go to the site, play around with it. But when you get to this page, this is the landing page. Just a couple of things I'll point out. We've created two portals. So one is for the brain injury community and one is for the legal community. Some information is represented on both sides. For example, we give all the research that we've talked about pertaining to brain injury in the criminal justice system on both sides. Both sides also have a brain injury 101. So in that section, we look at what a brain injury is, common challenges, how to work with those challenges. So if you know somebody has an issue with memory, what are some strategies you can employ? If you know someone has an issue with aggression, what are some strategies you can employ? So those are available on both sites. And then each site then goes into, if you're somebody with a brain injury or if you're somebody supporting someone with a brain injury through the justice system, what are some things to be aware of? What are some tools that you can use? What are some resources you can access? And when we go and we look at it through the legal community's lens, we look at things like how to support somebody with a brain injury that you're representing. So when you're at a bail hearing, when you're in court, what are some things you can do? We also include printable resources and tools. So these are an example of some of the things you will find on the website. So we offer a brain injury identification card. So somebody can have a card if communication might be impacted, especially in a stressful situation, like if they're encountering police or a legal professional, they can show this card, which identifies some of the communication issues they might be having. We also have 2 screening tools available to you. There's the HELP screening tool and the Ohio State Valley screening tool, which is a kind of quick tool, some questions you can ask to really help identify whether or not someone has sustained a brain injury. It's not meant to diagnose, but it's meant to bring awareness to the fact of what challenges somebody might be experiencing and what the next steps would be. We have different tools like questions to ask your lawyer, and these are fillable forms that can be done kind of while you're sitting in front of somebody. And again, not necessarily with a lawyer, you might be with a social worker, with an occupational therapist, but kind of giving somebody an indication as to how your memory works, what helps you, what doesn't help you. And then we have a series of videos. So we are very fortunate to have many people collaborate on this project with us. So we have videos from a lawyer, 2 people with lived experience, somebody who's been working in the justice system with people with brain injuries. So all of these can kind of give you a better picture of what's happening and how you can support somebody. I will also mention, I don't know how well you can see it in the slides, but there is a little guy at the side, or gal, a little person. It's our accessibility tool, so you can click on it and it'll allow you to have different accessibility features. The site can be translated into 22 languages. So when you go into the site, there is a drop-down menu that you can choose, so you can view it in the language of your choice. And then the documents that are PDF, so those printable tools that we've created, they are available to you in English and in French. When you're on the site, if you have any questions or any ideas for more resources, there is a place to email us. So you can email us at info@bist.ca and let us know if there's anything else we should add or if you have any thoughts or suggestions. Clearly, Katie and I and Mary didn't create this site all on our own. We had numerous people assist us with literature, and when you're on the site, you'll see there's a ton of content. So certainly hats off and thanks to all these wonderful people listed here who assisted us with our project.
I think it's also really important to note as well, Melissa, that we had many members with lived experience review the content of the site, as well as legal professionals. So we kind of went back and forth a couple times, well, more than a couple times, to ensure that it was understandable and didn't lose the legal context of it as well. So we wanted to make sure that this site was as accessible and as practical as possible. So we had members with lived experience review the content.
That's true. Thanks, Katie. And this is just really one of the defining principles of BIST in the work that we do. We're big fans of Trevor Noah. And one of the things that really resonates with us is when he said, people love to say, give a man to fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. But what they don't say, and it would be nice if you gave him the fishing rod. That's the part of the analogy that's missing. And when we look at the people we support with brain injuries, they're really missing the fishing rod sometimes, which could be that support person or that cognitive tool, that device that assists them to navigate complicated situations, such as the justice system. So really we strive as support people to be that tool for them. And if we can't be there all the time, to find ways to allow them to participate in the most accessible way possible. That concludes our webinar. So thank you so much for watching and listening to us. We hope you have fun with the site, that you go through the site, lots of different resources and tools and videos, so super interactive. And please get in touch if you have any questions. We also have a database of people who might be interested when we get updates to the website or if we offer more trainings. So feel free to enter your contact information on the site and we will add you to our mailing list.
Thank you so much for joining us today.